Good afternoon. Thanks for joining this webinar on state and federal funding resources for municipal infrastructure. My name is Chris Dodson. I'm the Associate Director for the Environmental Finance Center at Syracuse University. And we're invited to host this webinar today by Congressman Brindisi's office. So we have Faith Favre on from his office, and I think she'd like to say a few words about why they think it's so important that we have this webinar today and why we're glad to have you on it.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Like Chris said, my name is Faith Favre. I'm from Congressman Brindisi's office in the Binghamton area. And I think the biggest thing that I can say is that, you know, we travel New York 22 almost every day, whether it's staff or whether it's the congressman, and we hear all the issues. And one of the issues that we've heard over and over again is issues with water and how to pay for it. And so I guess the questions that we had were, what's the best way to pay for it? You know, are there grants? Who can we partner with? Should we do it on our own? So we wanted to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to, you know, get on the same page with all of this. And we, our DC office met with Tim Drum, probably in Washington, DC, about, you know, how we can do that with the Syracuse University Center for Sustainable Community Solutions and Environmental Finance. And we decided this is the best way to do it. So the congressman asked if we could set up this workshop, and of course, you know, we went ahead and did, and lots of thanks to Chris and his team for making it happen. So I'll turn it right back over to Chris.
Thanks, Faith. So what I'd really like to do here today is give a kind of a 30,000-foot view of a number of different funding programs that are available through New York State and the federal government. And I should say, just because Congressman Brindisi's office had kind of facilitated this webinar to happen, obviously anybody from New York State, and I know there's people who are outside of his district, this is relevant for anybody in New York State. So, so there's a lot of information in this PowerPoint. What we're going to do is share this PowerPoint and this recording of this webinar with all attendees, all registrants later, probably early next week. And you can use that PowerPoint, that document, as a reference guide. But I'll introduce you to all the funding programs and what they fund today. And then if you need to do a deeper dive, you'll have that detail for you. So some of these slides are busy, and I'm not going to read them word for word, but they'll be there for you to use later. Also, we'll be able to take questions at the end. So you'll see in your control panel down near the bottom, there's a questions tab. You can just go in there and type a question at any time. My colleague Tess Clark is here sitting silently next to me. She'll be looking for questions, and I will attempt to answer as many as I can before the end of our hour-long time together. And any that we can't get to today, or I don't have a sufficient answer for, we will attempt to answer later and send those questions and answers out with the PowerPoint and the recording. All right, so let's get started. So, well, actually, before I advance the slide, so what we do here at the Environmental Finance Center is we really work with local government on water and wastewater and stormwater infrastructure issues. We help folks identify appropriate funding and financing. We help folks identify what do they actually need. Do you need new infrastructure? Do you need a new plant or a new pipe, or do you need to go through a planning process because you don't know what you don't know about what you need? And helping to answer a lot of those questions before you get to the how to pay for it question. And then we help you with the how to pay question as well. So hopefully I'm able to help you do some of that today. All right. So my first point really is to plan ahead for your project. State and federal funding programs are not swift. Even in emergency situations, the money does not come swiftly. Planning, identifying a project, planning for it, preparing the application, receiving the award, then getting into contract for that award can take a year or more. And so you want to start thinking now about what you might want to be trying to pay for next year at this time. So my other point is, working with your own municipality, but looking at partner municipalities, the county, a town if you're in a village, or an adjacent town if you're a town, because there's opportunities for shared capacity, right? Doing these kinds of projects can be really hard. Grant administration should not be underestimated. It takes a lot of time, not only to prepare the application, but then to manage the money when you have it. And state and federal funding programs have a lot of stipulations, a lot of red tape, a lot of strings attached. We can complain about that all day. It is what it is, and you just have to acknowledge it's going to take a lot of time. Also, do not underestimate how much utility your soil and water conservation district can be. Maybe not for building a wastewater infrastructure, a wastewater treatment plant, but for a lot of other watershed services and a lot of other projects that could benefit your municipality. If you don't know what your soil and water conservation district does or is able to help you with, I'd schedule a meeting with them and chat and get to know them, because I've found in a lot of towns and villages we work with, the Soil and Water Conservation District is a great partner to have at the table. A lot of the funding programs that I'm going to run through today are available through the New York State's Consolidated Funding Application. You should make yourself aware of the CFA process and the Regional Economic Development Council. And so this slide shows how this state is divided up into different regional councils. Every regional council has a committee, work groups, and they provide, so every project that goes to the consolidated funding application is out of a 100-point scale. The regional council, your local regional council, assigns 20 of those points. So it's good that they know that you're trying to put a project together and seek state funding, and that way they can support your project and they can award those 20 points. The difference between 100 points and 80 points is huge, and you don't want to go into Albany with an application that's already lost some points at the local level because you haven't developed that relationship in a way that that is going to make sure your project is supported by the local regional council. So you see the website there, regionalcouncils.ny.gov, and the applications are annual. The application generally opens in May and generally closes in late July, and then all of the projects statewide are announced typically in early December. So this is just an example of a screenshot of the website, an example from Central New York, where I sit, where some of you may sit as well. There's a resource center for every region, and so it's specific to your area. You can also see what's been funded, who's been funded, and what the kind of objectives are for your region. So this is just a quick overview of all of the funding agencies I'm going to provide an overview for today. So we'll start with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They have, I'm focusing primarily on water today, drinking water, wastewater, and some stormwater today. So there are a lot of other funding programs out there. There's a lot of other money that funds other things that you could benefit from as well, but just focusing on water today. And you'll see by the end of this webinar that there's a lot of funding for water. So again, I'm going to try to keep it high level. So we've got 3 funding programs here. And they're all under the Water Quality Improvement Project program, WQIP for short. Eligible applicants here, again, soil and water conservation districts can be a helpful partner. If you don't think you have the municipal capacity to manage a grant, and there's a role for the Soil and Water Conservation District to play, they may be able to administer that grant for you. Many of them are very well versed in managing grants. Obviously, your own municipality, a municipal corporation, so a special assessment district or a public benefit utility, and then not-for-profits, but only for source water and aquatic connectivity. So again, most of this money is going to municipalities, towns, villages, cities, soil and water conservation districts. And so here are the eligible activities. I'll get into a little bit more detail with them in the subsequent slides, so I won't read them here. So wastewater treatment. So again, under WQIP, they will provide money for constructing a new wastewater treatment plant, or addressing failing on-site septic systems, or upgrading or replacing an existing wastewater system. And also looking at potential pollutants of concern, like nutrients that contribute to harmful algal blooms, or if your water body is under a TMDL, like the Chesapeake Bay is. The next WQIP funding program is non-agricultural, non-point source. So what does this mean? Essentially, stormwater management. So looking at areas where you may have particular trouble after wet weather with stormwater, either flooding or washing out other infrastructure, or inundating areas of your town or village, or too much I&I, infiltration and inflow, into your wastewater system that then maxes out the capacity of the wastewater system. So you can see all these eligible categories. Again, I'm not going to read through them all, but these are things that can be funded through the non-agricultural, non-point source part of the WQIP program. I will point out, though, that there's a 25% match. Excuse me. There's often match requirements for these funding programs. There's a lot of, I mean, I could talk for another hour about match and how to track it and how to count it. It could be your time, it could be your truck, it could be actual other capital costs or cash, but there are ways to come up with match. All right, the next one, land acquisition for source water protection. Again, this is to protect public drinking water supplies and provide easements or watershed protection. Salt storage. So when it rains on an open salt pile, that salt washes into a drinking water supply, sole source aquifer for drinking water or something else. You know, a lake or stream or something that might be impacted by that salt. The DEC, through this WQIP again, will fund 50% of the construction of a salt storage shed. And I think the last one here is aquatic connectivity restoration. So again, you know, thinking about water quality improvements for the benefit of habitat or for the benefit of drinking water or wastewater, just restoring some natural connectivity through dam removal or culvert removal, or reconnecting wetlands to other water bodies. And this gets a 25% match. These types of projects really, in my opinion, sit in the wheelhouse of soil and water conservation districts. And if you had these kinds of projects that you could identify and then share with your soil and water conservation district, they could pretty much do this project for you. Oh, one last one, sorry. So if you're in an MS4, and an MS4 is a municipal separate storm sewer system, and that's based on % urbanization of your of your municipality, how dense you are essentially, and you don't have to be that dense to be an MS4, densely populated, densely developed. To be an MS4, there's money there essentially for mapping of your stormwater system and or a purchase of a vacuum truck to help keep your infrastructure, particularly your paved infrastructure, clean, so that stormwater also will be clean when it's released into the local water body. All right, so this is also a DEC program. This is separate from WQIP. This is really cool. So again, if you don't know what you don't know about your stormwater management in your community, but you know there's probably something to address there, you can apply, again, through the CFA for a grant to essentially create a planning report to see what kind of stormwater infrastructure improvements you might need to make. And then you can go back when that planning report is done and get grant money through the WQIP's non-point source program. So I think the state's kind of cool with some of their projects when they actually, because they actually provide planning money or feasibility money or creating an engineering report before they fund the project, so that you get money for the planning and also for the project. And the last DEC grant is the Climate Smart Communities grant. This one's kind of cool because it's kind of wide-ranging in what you're able to do with it. So you could remove dams or levees, or you could harden your physical infrastructure, thinking of like waterproof doors on wastewater and drinking water infrastructure plants, or raising certain assets so that they're more resilient to flooding and things like that. And really, this money gets divvied up in two different ways. One is through certification projects. So you can become a climate smart community and be certified as a climate smart community. And that's some technical assistance that my center can and has provided to communities in the past. What that gets you really is an invitation to then apply for the implementation money, which you see there's a lot more money available, and you can do construction projects. You can build stuff with that money. The other value of the certification projects is that it's money, again, to help you with planning or assessment. You could do a watershed assessment or an assessment of your infrastructure, or an inventory of your infrastructure, which is a great basis for asset management to make sure you're maintaining your capital investments. And I could talk for another hour about asset management. But again, certification money is for planning, figuring out what you need to do. Implementation is for, now that you know what you need to do, here's some money to get it done. Just a little bit more detail on climate smart communities, which I'll leave for you to read on your own later if this is an interesting program for you. So now I'm going to move to the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation, which is an arm of the DEC. It's like a funding arm of the DEC, and also the New York State Department of Health. So you could think of the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation as an infrastructure bank. So it funds a lot of water and wastewater and stormwater projects. And so that's what we're going to talk about here with this list of projects, or with this list of programs. So the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. The State Revolving Fund is essentially a federal program through the US EPA. The federal government gives hundreds of millions of dollars to all of the states to fund drinking water every year, to fund drinking water and wastewater infrastructure projects. And so this is our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund here in New York. It's administered by both the EFC and the Department of Health. Because it's drinking water, it's Department of Health. It operates on the federal fiscal year. They have this thing called the Intended Use Plan, and this is the fourth bullet. And you can see, if you go to www.efc.ny.gov, the Intended Use Plan. And what that really is, okay, and I'm making up hypotheticals here, so don't quote me on these numbers, but okay, the federal government has given New York $100 million this year. This is how New York intends to use that money. And then there'll be a list of projects, and again, hypotheticals, town of Shenango, new wastewater treatment plant, you know, X number of dollars. So it shows the projects prioritized by need and other things about how they intend to use that money that year. Not every project gets funded in the year that they apply. And so you stay on the intended use plan for multiple years sometimes until your project reaches a certain priority or until the money is available. So the line of the cutoff line for funding varies from year to year based on the allocation that comes from the federal government. So just a little deep dive on that. And again, any questions, pop them in the question box and we'll try to get to them near the end. So what makes you DWSRF, Drinking Water State Revolving Fund? So program eligibility, essentially anybody who runs a public water system, whether it's nonprofit, non-community, like a school, or some sort of Jewish community center or something like that, or a community water system. Again, public, municipally owned, or private. Privately owned, but it serves the public. And the eligible projects, you see them listed here, essentially infrastructure again, right? And we want everyone to be in compliance. And so it's a compliance-driven kind of thing, but it's also what's the state of your infrastructure and what kinds of improvements might you need to have. The clean water, state water side, this again is administered by the EFC, but also with the DEC because it's wastewater. And again, looking at low-cost financing for wastewater and water quality infrastructure, and it's really three things: point source projects. So a point source is literally something you can point to. So a wastewater treatment plant or the pipes and the pumps that feed it. Non-point source, that's something you can't point to, right? It's more diffuse, so like stormwater, right? And then the national estuary projects, which really are focused more in the Hudson. So how do you get started? How do you get on the IUP, the intended use plan? First, you go to the website plus.efc.ny.gov and you complete a project listing form, and then you start going through the process of submitting your engineering report and other forms, and then that gets you on the intended use plan. You can do this at any time. This is not a CFA project, so you can put yourself on the IUP tomorrow if you wanted. It would take you time, obviously, to put things together, but you know what I mean. And then the next step, you apply for the financing. So you have to go through and fill out a few other forms, adopt a bond resolution locally to support the application, do seeker, and form a district if you need to form a district. If you don't, well, then you've got that done already. So what does that really get you when you're on the IUP? So there's different interest rates that come based on need. Some communities have demonstrated need through income or through other priorities, so that they get a subsidized rate or a 0% rate. There's also the market rate for projects that need to be done, but the loan doesn't really need to be subsidized. And then you can also do short or long term. Some of these projects are 30, 40 years financed. I do want to point out here that the state revolving funds are loans, but if you think about a 0% loan, that's in a way a grant, right? If you're talking about a $4 million project, the amount of money saved in having no interest on that project is significant and should be communicated to the decision makers in your community and your ratepayers. So there, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with the 0% loan if that's what you end up getting. I mean, certainly grants are nice, but again, a 0% loan is kind of like a grant. So the Water Infrastructure Improvement Grant, so this is not state revolving loan funds, but it is managed through the EFC. This is for both clean and drinking water projects, and it also includes projects to combat emerging contaminants. If you've not heard of PFOA or PFOS, these are chemicals that are starting to contaminate our drinking water supplies. Well, I think they've been contaminating our drinking water supplies for a while, but we're only now becoming aware of it. 1,4-dioxane and other impacts. So that's one way that this money can be used. It can certainly also be used to look at building additional water and wastewater infrastructure or rehabbing it. This program, WIA, is relatively new, and in the few years that it's been around, $680 million has been awarded to 424 projects. And again, this is a New York State program. There's also the InterMunicipal Water Infrastructure Grant Program, or IMG for short. This is a relatively new program. It's cool because, again, like I mentioned earlier, maybe two towns or the town and the village want to build some infrastructure together or connect their infrastructure for redundancy and maybe even purchasing water one from the other or something like that. This is a great program for those kind of intermunicipal water projects. So for these two programs, the municipalities again are eligible applicants. You see there's other eligible applicants as well. District corporations, school districts, etc. And again, it's the eligibility here is for municipally owned sewage treatment or public drinking water systems, construction, replacement, repair, compliance. Another program they have is Integrated Solutions Construction, ISC for short. This is also a relatively new program. This essentially says, hey, if you're going to build a road or if you're going to dig up the street so you can put in some wastewater or drinking water infrastructure or repair that drinking water or wastewater infrastructure, can we take a little bit of money from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and make that project green to capture stormwater? So if you're going to dig up the road, when you put the road back down, can you manage the stormwater that comes off that road in a different way? Related to that is the Green Innovation Grant Program. This is a great program focused exclusively on managing stormwater using green infrastructure. Pervious pavement, rain gardens, swales that take water off of impervious surfaces and treat it essentially impervious surfaces. And again, with any of these projects or any of these programs, if you have questions, pop them in the box, or you can reach out to me at another time, and we can get into some more detail. And we will be sharing these slides with everybody later, so you have them as a resource as well. So just like some of the other planning grants, the DEC and the EFC offer an engineering planning grant. Again, it's like we think we need to do something about our wastewater treatment plant, but we don't know what. Or our drinking water treatment plants, but we don't know what. Or our pipes and pumps. They'll give you money to develop that engineering plan that will serve as the basis for additional funding to implement that plan. So say maybe the engineer says, well, we need to rehab the treatment plant in District 2. This is the way we need to do it. Here are the feasibility and the engineering report, and then you take that information and use it as part of your application to get more money to actually build that project. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the next funding program, which is through New York State Homes and Community Renewal, and that's the Community Development Block Grants. New York State Homes and Community Renewal has a plethora of funding programs from housing to business development, economic development, but again, focusing on water infrastructure here today. They do have an awesome, in my opinion, Main Street program. So if you're in a city or a small village and you've got what people a Main Street area, a business district, that funding program is great for kind of revitalization, facade improvement, new sidewalks and trees and art and things like that, to make your downtown, your Main Street more enjoyable. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about that any more than I already have, focusing on water infrastructure again. So they really have two programs, the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, which is a federal program managed through the state, and their imminent threat program, which is emergency money, and I'll get into that in a minute. So through their CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, this is the kind of stuff that they can fund. I've highlighted the stuff related to today's webinar topic. But you see there's other opportunities. So they're really focused on low to moderate income areas. If you haven't done, or if you're thinking about doing a project and you think you might be in a low or moderate income area, working with RCAP solutions, or talking to the county, or even communicating with me or your engineering firm about developing and distributing an income survey is going to be a necessary part of almost any application that you put together, not just for Housing and Community Renewal's CDBG program, but USDA Rural Development and others. And that's how you can get some of the hardship money or the subsidized money, is by demonstrating the need of your community. So you'll see here, this is what they can fund: public water systems, public sewer systems, stormwater. Again, water, wastewater, stormwater. They can also do private water and wastewater systems, construction of new or replacement of existing septic systems. If you're a community with a lake in it, right, that is lined with houses, with failing septics potentially, again, your soil and water conservation district can be an asset for you in that regard. But this funding program can also help you to improve the water quality in that lake or stream, or wherever you have folks on septic near a water body. And the value of having improved water quality is it depends on where you are and how you use that water, but it's recreation, it's property values, it's avoiding harmful algal blooms, it's potentially even a drinking water source. So the imminent threat program is typically in response to an event. And so here you see some examples: Hurricanes Irene and Lee. In the past several years, there's some wicked flooding in Yates County affecting Penn Yan in the summer of 2015, and then the Lake Ontario flooding, inundation rather, that occurred in 2017 and has occurred again this year in 2019. All of these kinds of events would then be able to access the imminent threat money. Just one example of an imminent threat from Cattaraugus County. They had a significant storm event, and it washed out a road that had a culvert underneath of it that carried stormwater. And so obviously this is something they weren't prepared to deal with because it was associated with a storm event. They're able to access the imminent threat money. So who's eligible? So not only does CDBG, in this case, focus more on low to moderate income communities, they also focus on smaller communities, smaller population. So they're looking at units of local government with population of less than 50,000. And frankly, that's a lot of towns in upstate New York and villages. And also counties with populations of less than 200,000. And when we send this out, you'll see this is a hyperlink that can show you the list of eligible communities and also the program guidelines. So this, you do have to use the consolidated funding application to apply for the public infrastructure, public facilities activities. The CDBG housing activities for the private water and wastewater has a separate, the septic example I gave earlier, that's a separate application, and that link is there at the bottom. And again, that's something you could jot down now if you're interested in, or wait until we send this to you in a few days. So, switching gears, once again, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development, Rural Utilities Services Program has money available for drinking water and sewer, also solid waste and stormwater collection. And so the water and wastewater loans and grants, this is the eligible applicants, a public body or a not-for-profit or a Native American tribe or federal or state reservation. Also, again, this is USDA rural development, so looking at rural areas with populations of 10,000 or less, looking at your capacity to borrow. Is it sustainable for the applicant to manage this money? You also want to consider the construction costs, the legal and engineering fees, and whatever purchasing you might need to improve your services, purchasing of existing facilities to improve your services or prevent loss of service. So these are all eligible costs. And again, applications take a long time to prepare, and you essentially can't count that time. You can't charge for that time to the grant-making agency. So again, thinking about your capacity to manage a grant once you have it, or a loan once you have it, is one thing, but also finding the capacity to actually develop the project and the application ahead of time. This is also a USDA program. You can apply for this through RD Apply, through their portal online. Emergency Community Water Assistance Grants. So again, looking at communities in response to an emergency that threatens safe, reliable drinking water. So drought or flood, earthquake, tornado, hurricane, disease outbreak, chemical spill, leak, or seepage. And then, so these are grants made for repairs or partial replacement, and grants can't exceed $1 million for a new water source, and they cannot exceed $150,000 for repairs or partial replacement. But in a time of emergency, a time of need, imminent threat, EQUAG, these are programs that can help you. And so finally, the last state program or agency with programs I'd like to highlight is the New York State Department of State. And again, they have a lot of funding programs. They've got a lot of other programs that they manage. But I'm just going to focus on these few here. So the Municipal Restructuring Fund. So this is non-competitive, rolling applications. It's not through the CFA, so you can apply at any time. And really, it's a phased process that helps the community identify ways to provide the services that they're already providing in a more innovative or more efficient way, and then maybe even be able to provide additional services using those savings. So you think about how people manage their time, how we manage our equipment, how we plow our roads and mow the lawns in our parks and cemeteries, and if we do have water and wastewater infrastructure, how we manage those assets. And then looking at ways that maybe we could do it more efficiently and provide those same services. The value here for the community is maybe actual monetary cost savings in both time and equipment and also energy and other things, but also the increased capacity. If we can figure out ways to do the same thing in a more innovative and efficient way, what we've really done is also saved ourselves some time, and that time can be used to do other things. This is a relatively new program, Municipal Restructuring Fund. The Local Government Efficiency Program kind of sounds the same, but it's different in the fact that you generally would be using this planning money. Again, another example of where they give you money to do planning, and then you create a plan, and then they give you money to implement. But how this differs from the previous funding program is that this is really looking at opportunities for intermunicipal efficiency. So maybe the town and the village have redundant services, and they might be able to share services and save costs. Or, you know, here where I sit in Onondaga County, which is obviously a more urbanized county than many who may be on today's webinar, the Onondaga County has been able to provide purchasing power for procurements for most of the towns and villages in the county, the city of Syracuse, and adjacent counties. And so that's a way that, you know, and it's become more efficient for some municipalities to be able to rely on the procurement capacity of Onondaga County. And also, the more they could procure, the cheaper things are per unit. And then they don't have to worry about those things so much at the local level. So again, you know, they'll give you money for planning and then give you money for implementation if it looks like the plan is something that you and perhaps another municipality would like to move forward on. They also have two federally funded programs, the Appalachian Regional Commission and the Northern Border Regional Commission. There's not a lot of money here, but it does fund programs in the counties that are highlighted. And so you see to the left, the Appalachian New York is essentially all of the southern tier. If you want to know more about ARC programs developed, or ARC programs offered in the southern tier, you could look at the Southern Tier West Regional Planning and Development Board. If you're in the left orange counties, Southern Tier Central Regional Planning and Development Board if you're in the blue counties, and Southern Tier East Regional Planning and Development Board if you're in the darker orange counties to the right. The Northern Border Regional Commission essentially operates similarly. Applications for the Northern Border Regional Commission can be submitted directly to the Department of State, as are with the ARC, though you'd want to run it through your Regional Planning and Development Board first. But for the Northern Border Regional Commission, you can see which counties are part of that. And the last program I think we have for the Department of State is one of my favorites. It's a local waterfront revitalization program. If you have a creek, right, and you want to put a park on it, or if you have a creek that floods downstream, you know, there's opportunities here. It's not just lakes and beaches and you know, things like that. It can be just about any water body in your community. So it funds preparing or updating a local waterfront revitalization program. So again, it helps you create a plan. So hey, you know, we've got all this riverfront property that's been completely underutilized for so long. It might be contaminated. We don't know what to do with it. You know, it occasionally floods, but it could be an asset. You know, you could apply to this program to get money to create a plan for how you might use that waterfront property, and then use that same money to build something there, you know, a park, or maybe just a path, or tear down a wall so people can have access to that area. So you can also develop watershed management plans, mitigate future physical climate risks if you have flooding and significant storm activity. So that's the LWRP, the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. And this too is also something that you apply for through the CFA process that would open in May. Oh, there you go. And you can learn more about that and what waterways could be eligible if you go to dos.ny.gov/funding. The LWRP, excuse me, is a reimbursement program. I think most, I want to make sure I'm accurate. I think most, if not all, of the grant programs that we've discussed here today are reimbursement programs. So that means if you get a $100,000 project and you start work, after you get your contract, you start work, and every month or every quarter you would invoice and show them the documentation for your costs and time and labor, or time and equipment and capital expenditures and everything else. And then they would process that and reimburse you for those costs. So there is a certain amount of upfront money that you need to have, essentially in your kitty, so to speak, when you run some of these projects. The loans are different, obviously. So anyway, that is everything that I have to share with you today. Unfortunately, so if you have any questions, now's the time to pop them into the question box. I accidentally left my colleague's contact information on this slide, Meredith Perot. She also delivers this webinar or workshop from time to time. She's more than happy to take your call or your email, or you could just send her an email and tell her that you want to talk to me. Apologize for that. I'll change that before we send these slides out to folks.
Another way you can get a hold of us is just by replying to any kind of follow-up email we send. Like we mentioned, we're going to be sending a follow-up email with our slides here and with some Q&A information. And also your go-to webinar emails that you receive will bounce back to one of us as well. So we want to get into some questions. And if you still have a few questions and you want to type them in, please go ahead. We'll do our best to get to all of them. So the first question, Chris, is that you mentioned several programs that fund water-related emergencies, like an imminent threat program. Do you know of any programs that fund emergency preparedness or stuff that you can do before a disaster might take place?
Yeah, the Climate Smart Communities program helps you create a resiliency plan or a disaster preparedness plan. Most counties, if not all counties, have some sort of emergency response plan. And hopefully, if they've done it in a way that includes the communities within that county. So sometimes that county, depending on the types of emergencies, the types of infrastructure you have, that county plan might suffice for a lot of particularly rural towns and villages. But yeah, through the Climate Smart Communities program, and also through FEMA. And I didn't talk today about FEMA at all, only because of in the interest of time, and because FEMA tends to be more focused on the emergencies and emergency response, also emergency planning. Certainly FEMA does have infrastructure money out there, but I didn't want to make everything feel so emergency related.
Right. Okay, so second question has to do with maybe some approaches for co-funding. So if you're interested in co-funding some projects that might be slightly different, maybe a source water project and a stormwater, but you don't really know where to start, do you have any advice?
So the one thing I neglected to mention, so I'm glad you're asking this question, is that practically all of the funding programs that I went through today are part of what they call the co-funders network. So the USDA Rural Development, EFC, Department of Health, Housing and Community Renewal, they all talk to each other. And so just say, I'm making it up again hypothetically, the town of East Nowhere wants to apply for an infrastructure project, and they're trying to make the financing work. And they apply to USDA Rural Development and to EFC. They start talking to each other and looking at the best financial package for that project, for that community, and how they can leverage their funds to make those funds go further. So it does happen that people get money from EFC exclusively or USDA Rural Development exclusively, but it also happens that you might get a couple or several sources of funding from the different funding programs I talked about here today. So I think one of the first steps would be to reach out to one of those agency contacts and see what they think of your project and where they think the funding for it is probably most likely to take place.
Great, and we are getting some questions about specific deadlines for some of these programs, and we'll get back to you offline about that, just because we'll have to double check. We don't want to give out any information that might be incorrect here. So if you did ask a question about a deadline, we'll get back to you. More substantively, Chris, what kinds of funding, I know you talked about this a little already, but if you could repeat maybe what kinds of funding are more appropriate to work with your soil and water conservation district, and then maybe what would you maybe stay away from?
For soil and water.
For soil and water, yeah.
So I think the WQIP program, that was the first program I talked about. I think that's a great place for soil and water conservation districts to get involved. You know, the hard infrastructure, building drinking water and wastewater treatment facilities and the pipes and pumps that are related to that, I think that's not really in the wheelhouse of soil and water conservation districts. But the stormwater stuff, the watershed stuff, the stream connectivity and rehab and repair, I think that's really where soil and water conservation districts can be most useful.
Great, okay. All right, so next, this is a question more about partnership. You'd mentioned that there were, you know, it might be more effective to apply as a group of people, or depending on what eligible applicant is most important or is the best. Do you have any advice for how to go about building a partnership for a specific grant? You know, if you have limited experience with managing or administering a grant, what kinds of, you know, steps might you want to take to get started?
So, you know, maybe it's just because I've been doing this job for a long time and I like it and it's kind of fun for me. Every year when the CFA, the Consolidated Funding Application Awards, are announced in December, they do this kind of event to announce them all. But they also create this booklet that lists out all the projects, how much they're funded for. So what is the project? Hypothetically, again, you know, wastewater treatment plant improvements. Who's the applicant? Town of East Nowhere. How much money did they get? You know, $300,000. What source of funding did that come from? You know, the WQIP or something like that. And then a description of the project and what county they're in. So the reason I bring this up is, you know, I scroll through those whenever they're awarded, because for me it's fun to see people that we've interacted with get awarded for projects that, you know, that they've been thinking about for a while. It's also fun for me to see the types of projects that are getting funded and where. It's only been a few years since the state's been disinterested in salt storage sheds. And, you know, the last couple of years you've been seeing them fund a lot of them. And, you know, and so using the salt storage shed as an example, you know, if you were to scroll through this booklet like I do, or maybe you're only interested in your own region or your own county, you can quickly go to those specific kind of areas in the booklet and be like, oh wow, that town 2 towns over built a salt storage shed and they applied for the money and they got it. I wonder how they did that. You know, and you could go talk to them a little bit and they could say, well, this is how we put together our application. We use this consulting firm. And that's an example of a partnership. It's not necessarily a formal partnership, but you've learned from their experience, and you may have also gotten yourself a reference for a consulting firm who can help you not only prepare the application, but build the project.
All right, and then just to round things up, I think we do have time for just maybe one more question or maybe 2 more questions. You covered a ton of different funding programs. Do you have any advice on how to best select or identify which one maybe fits your project, or some easy, quick advice like you just mentioned, going through the funded projects already that might have occurred? What can help you kind of navigate that process?
Well, if you look at, you know, look at your eligibility. If you're a town or village or city, if you're a municipality, you're probably eligible for just about everything. But also, what do they fund? You know, what is the funding program's goals and objectives? And then, you know, how do they fund? You know, loans, grants, do you need match? Are you a hardship community? Are you low to moderate income? You know, asking yourself those questions starts to help point you in the direction of the most appropriate funding program, at least to start. The other way I'd answer the question is that excluding the SRF and USDA Rural Development, and I think the WIA program, and maybe 1 or 2 others, most of the projects that I went through, programs I went through today, you apply for through the Consolidated Funding Application, the CFA, and so you don't have to decide for yourself which funding program is most appropriate. You describe your project, you put in the different parameters and the other required stuff, and the CFA process essentially decides for you the best funding program to fit your needs.
Well, that's great. I think just for some quick housekeeping, the same email that you used to register for this webinar, keep your tabs open for an email from us, the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, just to make sure that you get the follow-up that you need. If you don't have Chris's contact information or Meredith's here, make sure you jot that down. And on that note, I think we can probably conclude for the day. So thanks, Chris. Also thanks to Congressman Brindisi's office. And do you have any comments?
Just that we're here to help. I mean, if you want some more detail on any of this information, or you want me to put you in contact with specific people at the state and federal level that manage these programs, please reach out. And I know Faith in Congressman Brindisi's office is also available for this kind of stuff as well. So thank you all for participating, and have a good day.